Uncle Dan,
Yes.
we live here in these United States, which
How
is...
dare you?
By any
Don't
definition...
dox me.
By any definition, this is the greatest country that ever was or shall be.
Case closed.
Yep,
Case-
there's just no way to look at it differently.
There's no
But,
arguing your way around that one.
The
It's
case
a
was
fact.
never made, but it is closed and it is final.
I have on my wall, though, a map of the world, and it turns out there are myriad other countries
What?
Gross.
and different kinds of people with different histories. Who knew?
Gross.
I don't know. I checked with the State Department, and I'm not allowed to go anywhere. So
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, there's one country whose history is particularly rich and complicated, and that country is Asia.
it's a neat country.
It's
It's a big country.
it's
Yeah.
pretty big.
Yeah.
But Uncle Mark, I think you have some to regale us with a tale from the Far East.
From the Orient.
My favorite thing is how conservatives somehow always call Africa a country.
They so do.
I know. It's like, well, okay, that's dumb. Yeah, so this is a crazy story, guys. You know those stories about how Hitler got into politics because he failed to get into art school, and therefore he was left unable to fulfill his dream of becoming history's angriest painter.
Right.
And how Fidel Castro would have stayed out of politics if the Pittsburgh Pirates would have fulfilled his childhood dream of becoming a professional baseball player. Well, those stories are a tad oversimplified and mythologized, it turns out, but there's a kernel of truth to them. But today, there's another story of a young man's dreams denied, causing him to get into both politics and, very weirdly, religion, that caused what is considered the bloodiest civil war in world history.
Whoa.
And it's a story I bet you've never even heard of, because I certainly hadn't heard of it until recently. And that is the story of a lad called Chinese people, I'm so sorry, Ho Xiu, born in 1814 in Qing Dynasty, China. That would change his name to Hong Shiquan after a sort of road to Damascus moment. And it was this weird little dreamer that would go on to found the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. And that would lead to the Taiping Rebellion, which would end in the death of a whole fuck ton of human beings, and may even have been an inspiration for one of the most seismic events of the very seismic 20th century. That sounds fun, right, guys?
Yay.
I am on board.
So, Hong Ho Xiu was born into a family with enough means to get him a formal education, which was kind of rare at the time. And it seems he was a good student. And he looked forward to a life in the civil service somewhere in the Qing imperial government. So when the time came, he traveled to the nearest big city, which was Guangzhou, to take the imperial civil service examinations. Well, apparently he choked. He didn't pass, which caused he and his family a lot of shame, and because his education had cost them pretty much all they had, he had to go back home and work as an agricultural worker, which was a position he saw as very much beneath his station in life.
Boo.
Now, if Hong was smart, he would have done what Baby Mark did 33 years ago, which is to have a math major friend take his Algebra 150 test, miraculously causing him to pass that class with a solid B-. True story. True story. But for anyone alarmed by this particular moral failing on my part, fear not. I dropped out before coming close to finishing my degree, so no harm, no foul. Someday, you can all come to my house and see the empty space on the wall where so many academic diplomas and degrees and certificates of merit are not. So,
Yes. I have all of those too.
yeah, we share that blank wall. So somehow, after a lot of struggle, the embittered young Hong scraped together the resources to study for the exams a second time, and returned to Guangzhou to try again. And great news! He failed. To be fair, the test was apparently crazy steep, right? And only 1% of test takers passed it.
Oh, wow.
But still, look, you're in the bottom 99%. But still, he felt humiliated again. So it was around 1836, and Western Christian missionaries had made some major inroads into imperial China, mostly due to the hostile English occupation of the Manchu Qing dynasty. While Hong was in Guangzhou, he heard the preaching of the American Congregationalist minister Edward Stevens and was giving a tracting pamphlet. He was only mildly interested, but hung onto the pamphlet, apparently, probably so he had something to boil and eat after so many failed tests. So after returning home, picking more cabbages, and finding time to screw up his courage and wounded pride one more time, he headed back to Guangzhou in 1837 and took the imperial test again. But great news, this time he failed a third time. Returning home in utter defeat, the 23-year-old Hong Huoshu had a complete nervous breakdown and was basically on suicide watch. As he lay in a depressive delirium, fretted over by his family, our plucky young test-taker had a sort of vision. A powerful, luminous male figure in a black silk robe, wide-brimmed hat with a golden beard appeared to him, saying, "Hey, I was just talking to this weird kid in a forest in upstate New York, and you seem like you could use a little pick-me-up as well." No, I'm kidding.
Wow.
This is a whole different first vision, you guys. So anyway, this black-robed visitor informed Hong that he was his son and that young Hong had a whole celestial family, including a wife and a big brother. Cool, right? You know that moment when an adoptee meets their birth parents and a whole new batch of siblings and cousins, which is kind of a huge mindfuck? But then they also find out they all live in the sky? How about that?
And there's a wife, too.
And you got, when did that happen? So Sky Daddy in the Hat also told Hong that he was sad that the people of China were worshiping demons, that Confucius was being tortured forever for leading them astray, and he gifted Hong with a sweet dream sword with which to exterminate the demons infesting heaven.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The Skyfather also told the feverish Hong that his given name was somehow sort of taboo, so he told him to change it to Xu Quan, which became his nom de guerre and the name by which history remembers him.
And is Chinese for L. Ron Hubbard. I don't think people know that.
Well, I didn't know that until I got a tattoo of it. Right? And then I was like, oh, great.
That's
right at the base of my tramp stamp.
Yeah.
That's quite the dream. That's pretty hefty.
Well, it's funny. There's an odd aside. We've discussed at least one other fever-induced, divinely inspired transition before, that of the public universal friend in episode 141, which is an amazing story about a person who fell into a fever and awoke not only with a new name and divine instruction, but had transitioned from the sex assigned at birth as well. So if you don't know that story, give it a listen. But the friend's transitional experience had a somewhat rosier ending than the newly christened Hong Zhiquan, as we shall see. So despite the incredible info contained in his high-temperature hallucination, Hong didn't seem to do too much with it in the immediate aftermath. He managed to find work as a school teacher, feeling like that was at least of higher social status than harvesting vegetables, and spent a few years teaching, seemingly contentedly around the region.
Hopefully he wasn't doing test prep.
Well, I've got great news. Apparently, having not learned his lesson the first 3 times,
Oh, come on.
our plucky Hong Quixote took one last tilt at the windmill of the civil service test. And great news this time, he failed again. So, as George W. Bush so eloquently put it, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, we won't get fooled again. But see,
we can't get fooled again.
You fool me 3 times, it's hard to put food on your family.
That's called a hat trick.
So at long last, being done with this shit, he rediscovered the little pamphlet he had received from the preacher Edward Stevens titled Good Words for Exhorting the Age.
Oh.
And from that,
Hong a great title pamphlet.
It's a great title of a pamphlet. Hong Zhiquan was able to understand what his fever dream was really about. And it's a doozy. So obviously, the guy in the black robe and the hat was the Christian God.
Right.
And Hong's big brother in the dream was Jesus the Christ.
Of course.
And God wanted Jesus' little brother, Hong Zhiquan, to rid the world of demon worship, meaning anything Confucian, Buddhist, or traditionally Chinese. Hong told his cousin, who said, the math checks out. And together they commissioned 2 giant swords from the sword-making guy for the demon-ridding chore. Sadly, the swords were later stolen by bandits, which is too bad, so sad. Oh well. So Hong and his small but rapidly growing band of followers began burning and smashing whatever Confucian statues and books they could get their hands on. This was obviously an alarming development to the local Confucian authorities, and soon Hong and his merry men were basically homeless, casting about the land for souls to save and Buddhists to smash. You know, if we know anything about Chinese society, tradition's kind of important. So
Really?
soon, Hong found his holy self back in Guangzhou and into the presence of an American Baptist missionary with the incredibly interesting name of Issachar J. Cox Roberts. I've never seen that name before, Issachar, whom Hong asked to baptize him, but Roberts refused, being highly dubious of the group, later saying they appeared, quote, bent on making their burlesque religious pretensions serve their political purposes. He was prophetic.
Well, I mean, it's like, yes, but how is that different from any other?
I was going to say that should be the
leader
motto for all religions.
It's really interesting to hear a Baptist missionary refuse to baptize somebody.
Right.
It's in the name, after all. So a disciple of Hong had by now founded a secret society in support of his views and junior messiahship called the God-Worshipping Society. Through this...
They're good at names.
They're really good at names. It's just clarity matters.
You said that was a secret society?
It was for a while,
Okay,
but
it
not
just
long.
doesn't seem like a smart name for a secret society.
Exactly. The dirty pornography pervert society at BYU. Damn it! Why did we call it that? Through this, Hong and his followers created what they called Taiping Christianity, a thoroughly weird syncretic faith with a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a whole lot of Bible, but with plenty of traditional Chinese plug-ins. Most especially the belief that the Chinese had already discovered the God of the Bible first, before anybody else, through the now diminished belief in Shangdi, which basically means emperor, who is the oldest, in the oldest Chinese traditions, was a supreme father god or sun god of some sort, right? It's also important to note that Hong and his followers were mostly from the Hakka ethnic minority, who were looked down upon and even persecuted by the ruling Manchu majority. So when the word of a Hakka messiah causing a spiritual revolution began to spread, the Hakka began to convert not just individually, but by whole villages and towns at once, because there was finally hope for a better life and improved status. Nothing else was working. So Hong Xiuquan began to feel the power of this huge grassroots surge. He became a little bit emboldened and declared himself an earthly as well as spiritual king, and that the Manchus of the Qing dynasty were not only demon worshippers, but were themselves demons in need of extermination. So, you know, that was considered not really cool by the Manchus, who had all the money and the armies and the navies and stuff. So they banished Hong for a while, but he found his way back to increasingly swelling ranks of fairly radical sort of Christians. And in 1851, on Hong Xiuquan's birthday, the God-worshipping Society of Taiping Christians declared war on the Qing dynasty in order to establish the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, kicking off 15 years of total fucking war. And I do not claim to even be a novice at Chinese history, and reading up on this period is like drinking from a fire hose.
Right.
But Lord, Chinese society and politics was complicated, right? Yes, the national imperial government had an army, but so did almost everyone else.
Right.
Local officials, opium warlords, conglomerates of business interests, prominent families, religious groups, etc., all had large numbers of men under arms, and their loyalties were kind of shifty. The Qing dynasty had also recently been greatly weakened by their defeat by the colonizing English forces, who were also players on the big, bewildering chessboard of the Taiping Rebellion. But overall, most of these forces aligned against the radicals of the Heavenly Kingdom. Hong's stated goal was not just that of political change or an improved status for his fellow Hakkas, but a total reordering of all of Chinese society according to his interpretation of the Bible, and the extermination of the ruling Manchu ethnic group. So, pretty much the rest of China was not super down with that. And of course, for the English occupiers, who were just after Chinese resources, the market requires stability, and to get the tea from the plantations to the ports, and radical revolutionaries bent on genocide and led by baby Jesus' Chinese little brother was going to put a dent in that stability. So what proceeded was literally total war, with whole regions being destroyed completely, and every man, woman, and child that fell under the competing armies' control being pressed into service of one kind or another.
Oh, this is the story of Mulan. You tricked me. I didn't realize that we were going to
It's Mulan. Spoiler alert. She's going to kick some ass. So after Hong's forces captured the city of Nanjing, which he considered his rightful capital, he had every Manchu man and boy inside executed, then marched all the Manchu women outside the city walls and had them burned alive.
Oh, my God.
But after more than a decade of brutal fighting, things began to finally turn against the Christian soldiers. A top Taiping general, Shi Dekai, was captured and sentenced to something called Ling Chi, also called slow slicing. This is where the term death by 1,000 cuts come from. And if you never do anything else I ask, please trust me and do not do a Google image search for that.
Okay.
It will haunt you.
Consider it done.
Yeah, there are
Sold.
pictures. So Hong Xiuquan and his closest followers found themselves surrounded and besieged by imperial forces in Nanjing. So running low on food, Jesus' little brother decided to make like Nebuchadnezzar and eat a bunch of wild grass, which it seems gave him severe food poisoning, sending him home to his Sky family in June of 1864. With that, the Heavenly Kingdom of Taiping collapsed within days when the imperial forces captured the city and dispatched the remaining leadership. The Qing rulers had Hong's body exhumed, cremated, and had the ashes blasted out of a cannon to prevent any remnant from becoming a sacred relic to any other, underground followers in the future.
Note to self, make amendment to living will.
Totally. I was like, they were pissed, but that sounds like a first-class send-off to me, right? Like,
That's
totally.
it. That's what I want.
that's actually what Johnny Depp arranged for Hunter S. Thompson's funeral. He was like blasted out of this big gun or something. His not bodily, his ashes, thank God. So this is hard to even comprehend. But in the 15 years Jesus' kid brother tried to reorder China and China refused to comply, 30 million people were killed or died of the famine and disease that the war caused.
God.
That is the total current population of Malaysia. Historians count the Taiping Rebellion as the deadliest civil war in human history, with our horrendous American Civil War claiming just 620,000 lives. And there are even, I couldn't find any kind of backup for this, but there are recent estimations by Chinese historians that the number could be twice that at 60 million. It's just staggering. So in addition to that, young Chinese radicals in the 20th century look back favorably on the Taiping rebels, both for the incredible audacity of taking on a dynastic system that seemed an immovable object in Chinese life, but also for their religious edict of all property being communal property. That's right. There is good evidence to suggest that a quasi-Christian radical cult with a self-divining leader who realized his claim to godhood in a fever dream was an inspiration for the Chinese Communist Revolution, which, unlike Hong Xiuquan and his followers, is still a thing. And that, my dear uncles, is the story of the biggest cult body count incident you've never heard of, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom.
That's
Yowza.
Have you been to Guangzhou? Either
No.
of you? I have, and it's a lot like this story. When I went there, I didn't know there was a city in the world called Guangzhou before I walked into it, and it was the biggest city I've ever seen in my life. It might still be. It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
And we came
millions and millions now, right?
Yeah, millions. It's an enormous city with just monolith, like big, brutalist skyscrapers everywhere. And I was coming from Hong Kong, so I knew that the cities could be big and crazy. But it's like there's so much of the history of China that it's just like, and their current culture. It's like I didn't even know this city of 12 million people existed until I stood in it.
Yeah, and there was a religious fanatic that caused at least 30 million deaths not that long ago.
Yeah, and in a century of tremendous conflict, and I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah, this was happening at the same time as the American Civil War, so it's recent enough.
Wow.
And we've never gotten our over our Civil War, completely obviously. So
do they do reenactments of the Taiping Rebellion?
sure, firing his ashes out of a cannon at the end. That would be awesome. So there you go, guys.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all of that. Let us move on.